When she took away the one thing that was keeping her alive, she was just 6 years old. The wooden surface was sliced by the cold wind. Little Lily Mae Whitmore tightened her grip on her faded blue blanket around her tiny shoulders, and she gripped the walls like a sword. However, something inside her 6-year-old changed when she watched that small native baby becoming blue in his mother's frantic embrace. A decision taken by the heart would alter everything. Everyone was trapped by the storm, which had been roaring for 3 days in a row. At the edge of nowhere, in the little trading post, with his weathered hands clasped, Samuel Whitmore paced close to the fireplace. As he observed the snow increasing against the windows, he balled his fists. Elena, his wife, perched on a wooden crate and attempted to use what little heat the faltering fire could muster to keep their daughter warm. Through the glass that was frosted, they could see the few natives who had sheltered beneath the overhang of the structure. The indigenous lady clutched her infant. Near, but they could see the youngster wasn't moving much even from within. The child's mouth had changed to his mother's face was a terrifying shade of blue, and it conveyed a desperation that words cannot describe. Lily Mae's tiny face was pressed up against the chilly window. She watched, her breath fogging the glass. The infant appeared so silent, so still. Even with her blanket she felt chilly, and she could only imagine how much colder that small, only flimsy cloth must be wrapped around the infant. She murmured, "Mama," pulling on Elena's tattered attire. "That infant is freezing." Elena's heart tightened as she looked toward the window. That was a look she had seen before. A mother who is helpless to stop her child from slipping away. Samuel, however, had made it plain. They lacked the funds to engage with the indigenous people. "Too risky," replied he. "Too complicated." Elena whispered back, "No, sweet girl," drawing Lily Mae nearer. "However, there's nothing we can do," Lily Mae said, yet she continued to gaze at the infant. She observed the indigenous woman's attempt to provide him with her own body, seeing as she warmed his small hands with her breath. Throughout, the small one's cries had become softer. The day, and he now hardly made any noise. Samuel walked over to the window. With a strong tug, he pulled the curtain close. Firmly, "Stop looking," he said. "We be concerned about our own family." Lily Mae saw her father's anxiety, but she also sensed something else, something that caused her eyes to burn and her chest to tighten. Looking down, she saw her grandmother's blue blanket, which she had sewn before she perished, the one that smelt of home and security, the one that kept her warm every night. The owner of the trade post, a Morrison, a rough man, had already stated that the locals were not allowed inside. They could bide their time till the storm beneath the edge of his roof, but that was the extent of his charitable giving. He whispered that he wasn't wishing to cause trouble on any side. The temperature continued to plummet as night fell. The breeze was audible to Lily Mae, howling like an enraged living thing. She attempted to sleep on the hard floor by pulling her blanket up to her chin, where the bedrolls had been spread out by her family. But there was no sleep. Each time she shut her eyes, she noticed that heard his feeble cries become progressively quieter on the blue lips of the infant. She could hear her parents in the shadows frantically whispering to one another. Her father spoke in a worried tone. Something about her mother's softness, that it had the sound of praying. They were also afraid. She understood. Fearful of the storm, fearful of going hungry, fearful of if they didn't reach the next town before their supplies ran out. What may happen? Rolling over, Lily Mae the breeze was heard. A baby was dying somewhere through the wall, only a few feet away. A newborn who appeared differently than she did, whose mother used language she didn't understand, yet who was as aloof and as defenseless as she was. Slowly, so as not to wake her parents, she sat up. By way of through a gap in the curtain, she could make out the dim form of the indigenous woman who was still trying to use just the heat from her own body to keep him warm. Lily Mae then made the decision that would put everything she family held to the values of trust, survival, and humanity in a society that seemed intent on freezing the kindness straight from the heart. However, she was going to do something that would cause things to happen that none of them could have envisioned. and all the settlers believed they understood about the tribe will be called into question by the tribal people's answer. Those they referred to as strangers. Like a ghost, Lily May crept out from behind her cover, her bare feet silent on the chilly hardwood floor. With the exception of the fading embers in the fireplace, the trading station was dark, creating dancing shadows across the walls. Nearby, her parents slept restlessly, her mother's shoulder shielded by her father's arm. She slipped over to the door. She held her priceless blue blanket to her chest. She was certain that her heart was beating so loudly that would awaken everyone, but her movements were obscured by the sound of the roaring wind. Cold to the touch was the thick wooden door. Touch, and she had to pull the iron lock silently with both hands. As soon as she pushed the door open, the icy air struck her like a forceful blow. Snow started to sting her hands and cheeks right away, but she pushed forward nevertheless. The indigenous woman was sitting there, nestled under a little overhang, against the building's wall with her sweetheart. The woman was startled to see the tiny figure coming through the snow and looked up. Her dark eyes were full of worry and fatigue, but they also had a passionate protectiveness that made Lily May think of herself, Mom. It was frightening how motionless the infant was in her arms. Lily May came slowly, just as her father had instructed her to approach frightened creatures. Her voice was barely audible as she extended her blanket with both hands, able to be heard above wind. The woman gazed at her, her face displaying a mixture of bewilderment and fatigue. Absent a word, Lily May moved in closer and covered the infant with her blanket. Immediately, the gentle blue silk started to cover the woman's eyes, widened in surprise at the small figure. Her gaze shifted from the blanket to the face of the young girl, looking for a trap or trick of some sort. However, Lily May simply pointed at the while, grinning nonchalantly. To the blanket then, baby. A child's gesture was universal and did not require translation. The face of the woman changed, and as she drew the blanket tightly about her infant, tears started to fall. May Lily, the voice of her father slashed like a whip crack through the storm. When she turned, she saw Samuel standing in the doorway with a horrified expression on his face. Rage. Elena had woken up behind him and was trying to make sense of what was going on. Now, get away from them. Lily May's stomach dropped at the horror in Samuel's voice, but she remained motionless. She was unable to. The infant's hue was quickly beginning to get better beneath her blanket, and the indigenous woman was embracing him while whispering what in her native tongue they sounded like prayers. Elena grabbed Samuel's arm as he lunged through the snow. Hold on, Samuel, take a look. Now the indigenous woman was talking. Gentle words that none of they comprehended, yet there was an obvious tone of appreciation in it. She gently raised the infant, revealing them how the heat was already being beneficial. The child's lips seemed less frightfully blue, and his breathing appeared more steady. Morrison, awakened by the noise, he emerged in the doorway. He shouted, "What in hell is going on out here?" before pausing abruptly. When he witnessed the event, he gestured to the native, saying, "And you, get that child inside before she freezes to death. Female, don't talk about anything else." However, during those brief seconds under the storm, something had changed. The female she looked directly into Samuel's eyes, her own brimming with a blend of stubborn dignity and desperate appreciation. Once more, she spoke, her voice more powerful now, and even though they couldn't make out what she was saying, they could hear the passion in it. Lily, with her flimsy nightgown offering no defense against the freezing temperatures, May was now shivering severely. Elena hurried ahead and carried her kid back toward the trading post's warmth after cradling her in her arms. However, Lily May continued to glancing at the woman and infant behind her mother. Elena placed Samuel's coat around her daughter inside and kept her near the flames. She muttered, "What were you thinking?" Yet there was more awe in her voice than rage. Samuel walked furiously, raking his hands through his hair, saying, "You could have frozen to death out there." He said, "You understand what you've done?" in a softer tone than previously. "Only that blanket provided warmth. We had a covering for you." And now he pointed aimlessly in the direction of the door. However, Lily May was not paying attention to his concerns about pragmatism. She was reflecting on the difference in the baby's face when he was covered by the blanket. How his mother's tears had not looked like the sad tears she had previously shed. The wind outside kept on howling. However, another thing was also taking place. Now they could hear voices conversing in their mother tongue more than the woman's voice alone. Although it was unclear where they had come from in this weather, other people had shown up throughout the storm. It was a mystery. Moving to the window, Morrison looked out through the ice. Muted. "Well, I'll be damned," he said. With a pallid expression, Samuel joined him at the window and said, "Looks like the whole tribe showed up." As the snow swirls, they saw moving shapes. Through the storm, dark people on horseback appear like phantoms. At least one, there were perhaps a dozen of them gathered on the trade post. Elena's heart tugged Lily May in closer, racing. Had they all been put in grave peril by her daughter's generosity? Samuel's hand automatically went to Morrison, had already reached for his shotgun and his rifle. However, the indigenous woman outside was yelling at her voice carried clearly through the wind as she approached individuals. She was displaying the blue blanket by holding it up, speaking quickly and in phrases that seemed significant and urgent to them. What the settlers within were unable to know was, through unidentified means, the tribe camp had already learned of the young girl's gift. Furthermore, something much more important than a war group was coming through. The storm. Something that would change utterly upended their presumptions about opponents, friendship, and what it really means to survive. The silently, horsemen dismounted, their bodies emerging from the storm like living ghosts. Samuel held on to his weapon closer, but he hesitated because of the way they moved. Their attitude was devoid of aggressiveness, no weapons drawn. Rather, they surrounded the mom and her child in a polite circle. An elderly man moved up, the wind whipped his long gray hair. His presence demanded attention despite the storm. He addressed his voice was deep and measured, and he spoke to the woman in their common tongue. Quickly responding, she displayed Lily May's blue indicating the trading post with a blanket. Morrison muttered an expletive. "That's precisely what I feared. Due to your daughter's inability to keep her own affairs in order, we now have an entire war party at our door." However, Elena was paying closer attention to the scene. "Samuel, look at them. Really? Look, do you think that's a war party?" She was correct. The authors weren't set up for conflict. Rather, they appeared to be safeguarding the woman and kid, establishing their bodies and horses as a windbreak. Many of them were sharing their own blankets after dismounting, furs creating a shelter that works better. Slowly, the gay-haired man moved toward the trade post entrance, his hands vacant and visible. When he arrived at the door, he halted and exclaimed in English with a strong accent, "We would want to talk to the kid who warmed our blood." Morrison appeared prepared to decline, but Samuel shocked everyone by moving forward. Through the door, he called back, "She's just a little girl." She was unsure of her actions. The response was that she knew exactly what she was doing. "Can we come in?" The tempest talks too loudly for appropriate language. Like flakes of ice, the question hung in the air. Morrison gave a headshake. Briskly, but Elena had already started for the door. "Samuel, that infant might passed away. He might have been saved by our daughter. What comes next?" Samuel made a demand. "They are there to repay. They accept her as payment. We have no idea what they desire." However, Lily May wriggled away from her mother's arms before making his way to the door. She reached up and started to lift the lock in spite of her father's objections. She opened the door wide before the adults could stop her because they were too shocked. The man with the gray hair gazed down at her, his A-worn face that is compassionate but serious. The woman with the baby moved forward behind him. The youngster is now safely wrapped within the blue blanket. The infant was making gentle noises that conveyed comfort, and his color had returned to normal, instead of worry. The man told Lily May, his English partner, "You are very small to carry such a large heart." Clear, but cautious. The mother gestured between Lily May and her infant as she spoke quickly to the man. The man gave a nod, solemnly, then turned back to see the young girl. You witnessed her son's death, Ayana claims, and decided to use your own warmth to save him. You sacrificed your defense against the cold to safeguard Lily May, who was trembling. At the doorway, nodded solemnly. Someone you had never met. He glanced scared, she said plainly. There was a reverberation among the people when the man translated her remarks. A number of them looked at each other in ways that felt profoundly significant. The man with the queer hair bent over Lily May's eye level. A gift like that has a lot of significance in our culture. When someone saves another person's life, particularly the life of a child, obligations are formed that need to be fulfilled. Samuel took a protective stance next to his daughter. She is not interested in anything in exchange. She is merely a young child who was unaware of the repercussions. Slowly, the man rose up, his eyes twitching. From Lily May to Elena to Samuel, consequences are not the same as understanding. What your daughter did many generations will remember tonight. However, the present debt needs to be paid first. He pointed to his individuals, and a few of them started to approach their horses. Samuel stiffened, his hand returning to his firearm. However, the events that followed exceeded all of his expectations of how this confrontation would take place, because whatever the settlers were about to do would be put to the test by what the tribal people were planning to do. Believed in the fundamental meaning of reciprocity, honor, and kindness. The tribal people started unpacking bundles in a place where surviving frequently meant having to choose between a stranger and oneself. From their horses, trudging through the snow with silent efficiency, Samuel observed with increasing bewilderment as they created things that were unattainable in such hard circumstances, such as dried meat, thick furs, and what appeared to therapeutic herbs, and most unexpectedly a gorgeously woven blanket that glistened even in the low light. The activities were led by a gray-haired man who was obviously regarded as a leader by the others. He spoke to Samuel once again, his voice echoing over the wind. What your daughter did tonight cannot go unpunished. I am Takakata. Samuel stated firmly, unanswered. In our ways, a life debt must be honored immediately. We don't want anything. Even though his voice trembled a little, she generously offered the blanket, freely provided. Dakota answered, freely returned, but with interest as required by honor. Hey, Ayana, the infant was still covered in Lily May's blue blanket when the young mother came up. She conversed with Takakota throughout their language. Her words were passionate and urgent. The other tribe members paid close attention, and a few of them nodded with what seemed to be consent. Takakota faced the settlers once more. Although Ayana wants to talk, her English is restricted. She begged me to let you know that your daughter did more than simply keep her son warm. She prevented him from dying itself. Without warmth, the boy might not have seen another sunrise as he slipped away. Elena gave a little gasp, bringing Lily May nearer. The consequences of her daughter's actions were starting to become evident. This wasn't merely a nice motion. It had been a life-or-death situation. Additionally, she requests that you comprehend something else. Takakota, the baby your daughter saved, is not just any child, she went on. He is our oldest medicine woman's grandchild, the great-grandson of a chief with 7 generations of ancestry. Your daughter did not save Morrison, who had remained mute throughout this conversation. Eventually said, just a life, but a legacy. That's all. Very heartwarming, but can't this wait until the storm passes? We're in the middle of a blizzard. Takakota's gaze remained focused on Morrison, gave the proprietor of the trading station a look that caused him to back off. Honor. Cannot wait for an opportune time. The weather. Such a large debt necessitates prompt action. Tribal members had completed unpacking their bundles and were now setting things out in the snow close to the entrance to the trading establishment. They worked in spite of the cold and wind, with meticulous accuracy, producing what appeared to be a legitimate exhibition. We provide these presents not in exchange for money, for no Dakota clarified that the amount paid could match what was provided. We present them in appreciation of the beating heart and what a tiny chest. He pointed to the organized objects. Furs to keep the child warm for several winters. Food to keep her family afloat during difficult times. Drugs to keep her healthy. He then raised a glistening blanket. This was our oldest grandmother woven. It, made from sheep's wool, which grazes in the high meadows where the spirits roam. It with blessings that will keep your daughter safe throughout her life. As she moved forward, Lily May's eyes widened with admire the lovely blanket. It appeared to capture light from non-existent sources. Additionally, despite the storm, it seemed to radiate warmth from within. Samuel, however, was still dubious. Why would you spend so much money on only one blanket? What is it that you truly desire from us? Takakota's face became grave. You're not aware of the gravity of what took place here tonight. Different individuals looked at a dying child in different ways, and your daughter did the same. Speech, different skin, and saw a needy soul rather than a stranger. In a world that instills a fear of the unfamiliar, she opted for love. For a brief moment, the wind appeared to calm down, as though even the storm was hearing what he has to say. Takakota went on. Such hearts are rare in any people. They need to be respected, safeguarded, and cared for. What we offer tonight is not money, but acknowledgement of something. Elena was moved to tears, finally realizing that they were sacred. We're seeing something significant, something that went beyond the simple exchange of things or even the saving of a life. Concerning the discovery of a spirit that went beyond the lines that typically separated individuals, yet as Takakota arrived at another gruff, irate voice broke through the darkness to deliver the priceless blanket to Lily May, the promise of violence and the sound of coming horses. Well, it appears that we have a little Indian, a passionate gathering here. As everyone turned, they saw a bunch of rugged-looking men come out of the rain, their faces difficult with the sort of bigotry that had been contaminating the field for many generations, and the head of this because the group was staring at Lily May and her family with a smirk that said danger was ahead. When two worlds attempt to reconcile, there are always people who stand to gain by maintaining their distinctions. And they were going to learn how far some people would go in order to maintain the animosity that separated the land. Like prophets of bloodshed, the newcomers rode through the storm, led by a scarred man with icy eyes and a sneer that recalled years of detesting anything that was not like him. 4 more rode after him, all armed, all displaying the same barely restrained rage. The leader, name's Garrett, yelled out without having to hello. It appears that we arrived just in time for the Indian violence that was rumored to be building at Morrison's property. Morrison stepped forward apprehensively. Garrett, there's no trouble here, just people waiting out the thunderstorm. Garrett's chuckle resembled shattered glass. No problem. I see a whole bunch of savages encircling white people, which seems like a lot of problems to me. He stared at the presents placed in the snow. They appeared to be attempting to purchase something, but what exactly? Takakota stayed motionless, but Samuel could see how the other tribe members were shifting their postures subtly. Not getting ready to... They're not buying anything, Samuel remarked, drawing back from the onslaught. But they were undoubtedly getting ready to resist, protectively, in front of his family. They are expressing gratitude for the support my daughter provided to their youngster. You mean your little child got herself engaged in Indian business? That's hardly helping, is it? Garrett spat in the snow. It's asking for problems, pal. Lily May, who was still holding her mother's hand, glanced up at the irate man with bewilderment. She couldn't comprehend why someone would be upset about assisting a chilled infant. Ayana, feeling the danger, drew her baby nearer and shouted frantically in their language to Takakota. The look on the old leader's face, his voice remained calm and controlled, but it darkened as he responded. We seek no conflict, Takakota. Sighed Garrett. Come solely to repay generosity with kindness and honor a debt? Debt? Only dead Indians, Garrett said, laughing once again. The person they owe for all the trouble they've caused is understand? And the only compensation that is worthwhile is what they receive as far away from good people as you can? One of Garrett's men raised his voice. Perhaps we ought to explain what occurs to these barbarians. When they become overconfident in the presence of white settlements, the air grew electrified with strain. Samuel sensed before lightning strikes. It builds like pressure. Morrison retreated as Elena drew Lily May behind her, his door obviously not wanting to be involved in whatever was going on. However, the standoff was broken by Lily May. She walked straight at Garrett's horse after emerging from behind her mother, her tiny voice piercing the breeze. An animosity as a bell. With real wonder, she looked up at him and questioned, "Why are you so angry?" All they desired to express gratitude for their baby's assistance. Garrett looked down at her, obviously unprepared for such a direct inquiry from a youngster. His smirk wavered briefly, only to be replaced by what could have been confusion. "Get back, little girl," he spoke, but some of the wrath had left his voice. "This is not a matter for kids." "However, it began with kids' company," Lily May answered. "I offered their infant my blanket since he seemed cold. They now wish to offer me a blanket as well. It seems reasonable." Her straightforward reasoning hung in the air like a challenge to all the nuanced animosity that had carried Garrett through the storm with his soldiers. This 6-year-old child was distilling their argument to its most basic form. Fundamental components? After someone helped someone who was chilly, help was now being offered in return. The Takakota observed this conversation with increasing vigor, his gaze shifting between the defenseless youngster and the men who symbolized everything that made it so hard for their people to live in peace. "Your daughter shares knowledge. That has led to shame. Gentlemen," he said to Samuel, "perhaps it is time for the children to teach the adults." Yet Garrett's something sinister was quickly replacing the bewilderment. Additionally, the way his hand approached his weapon indicated that he had no interest in learning from kids or anyone's advice. Because some people utterly choose hatred, because the evil they have constructed their lives around is threatened by even a child's innocence. The hand of Garrett lingered close to his weapon. However, there was something about Lily May's bold eyes that appeared to stop him cold. The remaining settlers, the tribal members, observed a moment of utter quiet as a 6-year-old girl confronted a violent guy. Spanned 3 different areas. Lily May went on, utterly oblivious to the danger. "You know what I think? And I think you're cold too. And when people get really cold, sometimes they get angry instead of asking for help." Garrett felt. The words strike him like a blow to the body. He obviously didn't want to feel the emotions that wrenched his damaged face. Behind him, uncertain of how to react to a child who was treating their commander like any other, his men shuffled uneasily. As someone who requires comprehension. When Elena moved forward to pick up her daughter, Dakota gave a subtly hand, halting her. The elderly leader was observing a development that he understood to be important beyond the instantaneous. Garrett growled, his rage returning. "That's enough wisdom from children," Garrett said. "You folks must, however," as he said, "Indians aren't welcome around decent folk, so pack up this little friendship gathering and move on." Unexpectedly, something occurred. After hours of unrelenting howling, the wind started to subside. The snowfall that had started to descend more softly after driving horizontally. As the air cleared, they could all make out something that caused everyone to stop. More lights were coming in the distance. Not another war party's glaring flames, but the cozy glow of lanterns that families are carrying. Residents from the neighborhood, attracted by news of the storm and worried about their trade post neighbors. "Well now," Morrison said, "it appears that we're going to have a genuine get-together." The incoming settlers included young men and women, children and elderly, all despite the cold. They were moving purposefully through the improved weather. As they approached there, the scene was lighted by lantern light. Tribal members and settlers gathered around presents displayed in a young girl in the middle of the snow. Garrett's face darkened as he realized they were coming. Excellent. Right now, we saw this Indian-loving folly firsthand. However, the settlers' responses upon arrival weren't what Garrett anticipated. An older woman named Mrs. Patterson was the first to arrive at their location. Her own granddaughter was roughly the age of Lily May. "What's happening here?" she inquired, surveying the crowd with interest instead of rather than terror. Our infant was spared the icy death by the little one. Ayana spoke abruptly in a shaky English, although reasonable. She raised her baby in Lily May's blue blanket, now warm and conscious. She covered herself so that our son might survive. As Mrs. Patterson's gaze shifted from the infant to Lily May and then to the presents placed in the snow. For heaven's sake, kid, this little one's life was spared by you. Lily May gave a nod, Shilly, suddenly feeling overtaken by the attention. However, more settlers were now coming, and news of what had, rather than wrath or terror, what happened was swiftly spreading among the group. Their expressions revealed something more, I wonder. The woman's voice was soft with emotion as she said, "That's the most beautiful thing I've heard all winter." A young father stepped out with his own young son in tow. It takes a lot of bravery to forego your primary source of warmth for an unfamiliar. In front of Garrett, his support began to fade. These were not seasoned combatants searching for disagreement. These individuals were families who recognized the importance of kindness and the significance of children's lives. "You're all being fooled," he uttered without hope. "They're merely using Indian deceit to attempt to get you to Takakota," meanwhile, has been observing this entire discussion with increasing comprehension. "Soft so they can take advantage." He moved forward and addressed the assembled settlers immediately. "Tonight your youngster did something that our people will remember. For years to come, remember." In the quieter air, his voice could be easily heard as he spoke. She was able to see past the distinctions that split us apart and did what she felt. This isn't deception. This type of spirit has the ability to mend the wounds. Among our peoples, he motioned for his tribesmen to start unpacking additional belongings from their horses. "We brought presents for everyone who stays here, not just the child. Furs to keep families together, food to give, and medications to heal Toasty throughout the rest of the winter." The settlers exchanged stunned glances. They anticipated conflict, but instead discovered that what they were seeing contradicted everything they believed to be true about the individuals they had been trained to be afraid of. However, Garrett was not done yet. His hand was now resting openly on his weapon, and his face was crimson with rage. It's over now," he hissed. "I refuse to let decent white people be tainted by barbaric lies." The moment was balanced on a knife's edge, with the threat of violence looming large over the peaceful storm. Due to sometimes the force of human connection rather than opposition is the biggest threat to hatred, and a few individuals will do nothing to stop that relationship from becoming established. The following events would be discussed for decades in communities throughout the territory. As Garrett's hand approached his weapon, everyone in the room realized they were at an intersection that would determine the future of their communities' connections as well as this particular moment, but it was Mrs. Patterson took the initiative. Garrett and the tribespeople were directly separated by the elderly woman. Her weary hands firmly grasped her hips. "Garrett Mitchell," she murmured, her voice bearing someone's authority, "who had contributed to the upbringing of half the children in 3 counties. You put that hand away now. Enough has been said. A child's act of generosity won't be the catalyst for 10 lives of bloodshed in this country." Settlers started to approach the conflict rather than flee it. They surrounded Lily May and the tribe members with their lanterns in a loose circle, casting a cozy glow that brushed aside the icy anger and the darkness that Garrett stood for. "These people came in peace. They came to honor what our little girl done," said the young father, moving his own child to his other arm. "If we can't respect that, what sort of people are we?" Garrett desperately searched his men for support. But even now that they were surrounded by families, kids, and elderly people instead as armed adversaries, they appeared unsure. Their desire for Takakota moved forward slowly, his hands empty and apparent violence waning. "I have seen many seasons. I have witnessed the costs of hatred to both our peoples," he remarked, his voice laden with experience of conflict. "We were shown another method tonight by a child who pointed to Lily May, who was observing everything with wide, attentive eyes. She saw a youngster in need rather than an Indian or white baby, and she did what she felt. Maybe it's time for the adults to take a cue from her wisdom." The tribe leader arrived into his coat and pulled out a piece of white stone that caused everyone to gasp, a peace pipe, adorned with elaborate symbols. This pipe is generally used to seal interpeople agreements. Tonight, Samuel found himself moving forward before he was ready to smoke it with anyone who would prefer peace to war. Despite his pounding pulse, he answered, "I'll smoke with you," realizing what he was doing. My daughter exhibited more bravery tonight than I have in years. Other settlers came forward one by one. Mrs. Young Father Patterson Morrison even came out of his trading post. To join them, Garrett and his men alone. Takakota lighted the pipe ceremoniously and reverently, then passed it on, yet they stayed apart, divided by their animosity. Something significant changed in the atmosphere surrounding them when the two men shared the sacred smoke, according to Samuel. The storm had passed, the stars were starting to emerge, and two settlements that had previously been divided by mistrust and terror, they were brought together by a 6-year-old girl's innocent deeds. The toddler walked up to Lily May and gently draped the exquisitely knitted blanket over her shoulders. Up at her with a smile that was untranslatable, and Ayanna returned the smile while her eyes froze. His wrath had no place here, so he turned his horse and galloped off into the night, his troops grudgingly following. Defeated by human decency alone, not by force. As the two villages started to share food and sitting in her new blanket, Lily May watched stories being told around a fire that was constructed with the help of both peoples. Adults discover what she always understood. When someone is chilly, you should warm them up, and when someone is kind, the small blue blanket sheet that she had given away was given back to her that evening, but she had acquired something much more priceless, and she had discovered that even the tiniest bravery can alter the world, one heart at a time. And as the tale was recounted and repeated throughout the years, people would exclaim that a 6-year-old girl who witnessed a treaty or agreement marked the beginning of the peace between the villages. If you like this article, click the video on your screen right now to view it. Frozen baby who chose love over fear. Another remarkable story where kindness and bravery meet in unexpected ways. Remember to subscribe and to help us continue to bring you more tales like this. Think about having a super chat. Your support is greatly appreciated.